All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, the Elbaum Mishpacha, for dedicating all the shirim and drashos in memory of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Kappel ben Avram Menachem. To thank Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the shirim and drashos this month in memory of her husband Avi Strimber, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Moshe and Ellen Gevant, for dedicating the week of learning in the merit of and Ellen's mother, Nechama Bas Shalom Yitzchak. To thank Larry Sufness for his dedication of our week of learning in memory of his beloved wife, Tanya Yona Bas Yaakov. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Mr. and Mrs. Milt Martyr, in memory of Mr. Martyr's mother, Hinda Bas Aaron Yosef, and Brachen Baruch Rifkin, for dedicating the shir this morning for the yahrzeit of Bracha's father, Yisrael Aaron ben Moshe HaKohen Zichron Levrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So Mazel Tov, brand new parak today, very exciting new parak, exciting new Gemara. We are picking up, today's daf is Samech Vav 66. We are picking up in Yirtz Hashem on 65b at the Mishnah. Eilu dvarim bepesach dochin as HaShabbos. Suppose that these are the things. Again, still focusing on Karban Pesach, which is actually quite exciting because we'll see some really fascinating halacha and an incredible Gemara today. These are the aspects of sacrificial service on Pesach, which ultimately are Docha Shabbos. So we'll say, so again, as we're going to see, certain aspects of Karban Pesach are Docha Shabbos, set aside the laws of Shabbos, certain things do not. So these are the things that set aside the halachos of Shabbos. Shchitaso, Zrikas Damo, so the shechting of the Pesach, of course, which can be done on Shabbos. Zrikas Damo, the sprinkling of the blood of the Pesach. Michui Kravav. So we'll say Michui Kravav means literally we're going to see the squeezing out of the intestines. So when the animal is slaughtered, there's often some waste that is still lodged in the intestines. They would squeeze that out of the intestines even on Shabbos. Vaktaras Chalavav, the offering of the fats. Aval Tzli. So we'll say these are all the sacrificial components or all the sacrificial rites which can be done even on Shabbos. However, Aval Tzliyaso, but the roasting of the Karban Pesach, Hadachas Kravav, the washing off of the innards of the Pesach, Ina Dochen Es HaShabbos. Ultimately, again, these things cannot be done on Shabbos. We'll see the distinction why certain things are permitted, why certain things are not permitted. Harkavaso. So we'll say, what about actually bringing the animal? In other words, we'll say, remember, you have to get the Karban Pesach to the Beis HaMikdash. So that, of course, if Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, so transporting the animal could go ahead and involve certain malacha. Let's say the animal can't walk. Carrying the animal, or even for that matter, in certain respects, leading the animal could go ahead and create certain what we'll call hotzah, transference issues. So so let's say, for example, bringing the animal from outside of the tchum, back to our Erevin days. Or the cutting off of a wart. Let's say the animal has some type of growth, which when the growth is there, you can't offer the carbon. But all you need to do is just cut off the growth. These actions are not Docha Shabbos. You cannot perform them on Shabbos itself. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dochin. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, even these actions are Docha Shabbos. So we'll say it's actually pretty amazing. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you could even go ahead and bring an animal from outside the Tchum. So let's say again, you're outside of the Tchum on Shabbos, Erev Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer says you could bring the animal from outside the Tchum. So I'm Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, I'll tell you why. Valo dinhu. It's a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? U'ma'im shchita shemishum malacha doches ha-Shabbos. Elu shemishum shuas lo yitchu es ha-Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says very simple. If shchita, Rabbi say, which is mamish ha-malacha. If shchita is doches Shabbos, then let's say, for example, we'll say, remember, we paskin that tchumen are dirabanan. Right? Actually, I should say it's a machlokes. Right? Rabbi Eliezer says certain actions which you're prohibiting are only dirabanans. If the oraisas are permitted, if you could violate biblical law for the sake of Karban Pesach, like shechting an animal, we'll say, is a malacha. It's one of the 39 malachas. So if you could go ahead and shecht an animal on Shabbos, then what? You're certainly permitted to go ahead and transgress rabbinic law for the sake of Karban Pesach as well. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, Rabbi Eliezer, you're wrong. Yom Tov Yochiach. I'll tell you why your logic is wrong. Look at Yom Tov. Look, Tiraba Mishum Malacha, Vasham Mishum Shus, I will say, for example, Yom Tiv, you could do Malacha, Ochel Nefesh. But yet, Isurim Dirabanan, right? Or I should say, Dine Dirabanan are still going to be Aser. So you see, it's not an all or nothing. Just because just because you're permitted to perform certain Doraisas does not automatically give you a license to go ahead and dispense with rabbinic law. So therefore, again, even if you want to say that on Erev Pesach, which falls on Shabbos, you're permitted to do certain Doraisas, that does not give you a license to transgress all the Rabbanans. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer is back to Yoshua. Mazi Yoshua. Yoshua, come on, what kind of argument is that? Ma Raya, Rishus Lemitzvah. You can't, again, I'm not suggesting, says Rabbi Eliezer, that all rabbinic law is simply thrown out the window. I'm just suggesting that whatever you have to do for the sake of the mitzvah of Karban Pesach should be permitted. And the same way that you're allowed to go ahead and do certain isurim deoraisa for the sake of the mitzvah of Karban Pesach, you should be able to go ahead and transgress certain isurim derabanan for the sake of Pesach as well. Hishav Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva jumped into this. Va'amar, he said, the sprinkling of the blood will go ahead and prove this point. Shehimishum mitzvah, remember, v'himishum shavos. Shabbos said, this is not the sprinkling of the blood. This is talking about the sprinkling for the tamei mace. Let's say if we take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Hozah tochiach, it's 3 lines up from the bottom. Rashi says, B'tamei mace, shechal shvi'i shalo lihios b'shabbos erev Pesach. She'im lo yaza lo ya'asa pischos. We'll say a very interesting case. You have a guy who becomes tamei mace, right? He goes to a levai. He comes in contact with the corpse. So what's talacha if you contract tumas mace? What's talacha? We take the waters of the para aduma, and ultimately they sprinkle it upon the individual on day number 3 and day number 7. But let's say for argument's sake, day number 7 falls out on Erev Shabbos, which is on Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach. So day number 7 of the second sprinkling of the waters of the para aduma fall out on Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos. So both say, so look, finish Rashi. Rashi says, and the problem over here, of course, is if you don't go ahead and sprinkle the paraduma water on the guy on day number 7, he will not be able to partake of the Karban Pesach that evening. Fa'afilu hachi, Rashi says, ina docha dahachi shabna Rabbi Akiva delo dachya va'zo shvusu demay malachi Ella mischazi kimatakin gavra. So both say we're going to see Rabbi Akiva holds that you cannot do the 7th day sprinkling on Shabbos. Now both say what's wrong with doing the 7th day sprinkling on Shabbos? It is asr midirabanan. Why is it asr midirabanan? Because it has the appearance of fixing, right? What Rashi calls mitakin gavra, like tikkun moneh, right? It has the appearance of fixing an item. Now, what are you fixing over here in this particular case? So what are you fixing? What are you fixing? A person, right? You're taking a person who's in a state of tumah, and you are quote unquote fixing their status by transferring them out of a state of tumah into a state of tara. So Rabbi Akiva says, Hazah, sprinkling is a great example because it's a mitzvah, right? It's a mitzvah to sprinkle the paraduma waters onto the individual on day number 7, but yet it's also asr midrabanan. It's also asr midrabanan. And I will say, not only that, the Rabbi Akiva says, Ve'ino docha es HaShabbos, and it's not docha Shabbos. So you see Rabbi Akiva, this is Rabbi Akiva arguing on Rabbi Eliezer. You see that things which are asr midrabanan, even if they're a mitzvah, don't automatically set aside Shabbos. Af'ata al tetama al ilu shafa pishem mishum mitzvah v'hem mishum shvos lo yitchu Shabbos. If Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Eliezer, you see that when it comes to Karban Pesach, you might have certain things which ultimately, again, are part of the mitzvah of Pesach, but they are not necessarily docha Shabbos. We'll see the formula in just a moment. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says, we'll say, but if you notice, this is a very unique Mishnah, right? Why is it such a unique Mishnah? It's rare to find such a back and forth conversation in Mishnah. Mishnahs are not usually like this, right? Mishnah is usually statements. But again, here, this is actually quite riveting because you have a Mishnah that is actually, what's happening over here usually happens within the framework of the Gemara. That's what a Gemara is. That's just very interesting. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer says, no, this is Rabbi Akiva, va'aleha anidan. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I'm going to give you my argument. So again, Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Akiva, I disagree with what you're saying. I mean, Rabbi Akiva said you can't do the 7th day sprinkling on Shabbos because it is Asr Midirabbanon. Even though it's a mitzvah, it's Asr Midirabbanon. What's the Isr Dirabbanon? Tikkun Gavra. You're fixing an individual. Rabbi says, Rabbi Akiva, I wholeheartedly disagree with you. If Shchita, which is a malacha, is Docha Shabbos, you can shechta Karban Pesach on Shabbos. So Rabbi says, Akiva, you're wrong. You can do the sprinkling on Shabbos. Because ultimately, again, if Shchita, which is a malacha da'oraisa, can be done on Shabbos, then what? Certainly Hazah, certainly sprinkling, which is only an Issa D'Rabbanan, could be done for the sake of a mitzvah on Shabbos. Tap of Samich Vav. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva responds, O Chilof. Or I can say just the opposite. Uma'im Hazah shimishum shvos ino doches ha-Shabbos. Shchita shehi mishum malacha ino din shlo titches ha-Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says back to Rabbi Eliezer, well, how do you know the argument maybe is just the opposite? Maybe I'll say like this. If Hazah, sprinkling, which is only Asr Midrabanan, is not Docha Shabbos, then maybe Shchita shouldn't be Docha Shabbos either. Right? Rabbi Akiva flips on his head. Let's work backwards. So the Gemara says, Mishnah says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, Akarta Masha Kasav Batorah. So Rabbi Eliezer says, it's also interesting how they refer to each other. Right? So Rabbi Eliezer says, Akiva, come on, cut it out. Now you know that you've effectively uprooted a pasuk in the Torah. Because what does the pasuk say? B'mo'ado. Both say the pasuk says, Vayasu b'nei Yisrael sa-Pesach b'mo'ado. The Pesach was given in its appointed time. And what do we learn from its appointed time? Bein b'chol, bein b'Shabbos. So b'mo'ado, both say, teaches me that Karban Pesach is always offered on the 14th of Nisan. Whether the 14th of Nisan falls out on the weekday, whether the 14th of Nisan falls out on Shabbos, it is always offered in its appointed time. Amrlo, Rabbi, Hava li moed li elu, ki moed li shchita. So he said to him, Rabbi, we'll say if you look at Rashi, Hava li moed li elu, shehezman kavua lahem, ki masha kavua li shchita, hilchach keimudalo kavia le zimna, umatzi le me'avid luhu me'esmol, lo dachu has. So we'll say Rabbi Akiva says back to Eliezer, you're right. But ultimately, again, it's only shchita which has a set time, right? Remember again, b'mo'ado, dafka refers to shchita. Who's to say that it refers to all of these other Karban Pesach related activities? We'll say to which finally yields Rabbi Akiva's rule. Rabbi Akiva's rule is Klal Am Rabbi Akiva. Here it is. Kol malacha she'efshar la'asosa me'erev Shabbos eina docha es haShabbos. Shchita she'efshar la'asosa me'erev Shabbos docha es haShabbos. Rabbi will say, to which Rabbi Akiva says like this. Here's the rule. Anything which cannot be done before Shabbos, halacha l'maisa, may be done on Shabbos. But anything which halacha l'maisa can be done before Shabbos must be done before Shabbos. So I will say, so therefore Rabbi Akiva will say like this. You see, Rabbi Eliezer was looking at this whole thing as an all or nothing. Either everything Karban Pesach related is mutter on Shabbos, or it's asr on Shabbos. So therefore, one shchita is going to be mutter. Then, of course, all the Yisrei D'Rabbanan are going to be mutter. So they keep going back and forth. So Rabbi Akiva essentially says, no, I'll agree with you, but Mo'ado teaches me Karban Pesach is done on Shabbos. But I will say logically, we'll see Rabbi Akiva gets this, but logically Rabbi Akiva says there should only be a dispensation for activities which can only be done on Shabbos. But anything which can be done before Shabbos, you only have a license to do before Shabbos and have no right to do on Shabbos. So again, we'll discuss Hazar. We'll say the sprinkling is going to be something a little bit different because remember, sprinkling, right, for the Paraduma waters is not an activity uniquely related to Karban Pesach. Now the truth is, if you're Tameh, it's a necessary step in order to partake of Karban Pesach, but it's not part of the service of the Karban Pesach per se. So I will say, this is the rule of Rabbi Akiva, that on Shabbos, you could do anything related to the Karban Pesach which could only have been done on Shabbos. But so shchita, for example, right? The first items in the Mishnah, the shchita, the sprinkling of the blood, the squeezing out of the intestines, the offering up of the fats, those are things which cannot have been done before Shabbos. Therefore, you're allowed to do them on Shabbos. But anything that could have been done before Shabbos, we'll say, for example, what? bringing the animal into the tchum, right? Carrying the animal to the Beis HaMikdash, cutting off the wart, things which could have been done before Shabbos. There is no license to do them on Shabbos itself. Rabbi say, here we go. Tan Rabbanan. Rabbi say, I meant to put this out in the chat. An incredible, overwhelming Gemara today. Overwhelming Gemara. Tan Rabbanan. But then I realized I shouldn't put it on the chat. Because the truth is, I'd be putting out the same message every single day. It's always overwhelming, riveting Gemara. Tan Rabbanan, so listen to this story. An incredible story. Halacha zunis al mnei b'seira. Both say this halacha, that meaning the halacha regarding what you're allowed to do, or the fact that Pesach is Docha Shabbos, that Pesach sets aside the laws of Shabbos, this halacha was forgotten by Bnei B'Seira. Now the Maharsha points out over here, that Bnei B'Seira refers ultimately again, I'm sorry, I meant to have it marked off, that Bnei B'Seira, the Maharsha says, Gimel Hayu Bnei B'Seira, Ve'im Kulam Talmidei Chachamim, Niskru Be'edyus, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say there's Rabbi Yoshua ben Meseira, Rabbi Shimon ben Meseira, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira. We'll say, so all of these individuals were Nisim, were leaders of the Jewish people at different points in time. Now, within the same time frame, but that's what it means, Bnei B'Seira. So, Lav Dafka, they weren't all three the Nisim at the same time. But what we're saying is, there was once happened that Pesach, let's listen to this story. Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos. So people wanted to know, so what do we do regarding the offering of the Karban Pesach? And Bnei B'Seira, the Nisim, right, past, present, right, all the three of the Nisim forgot what the halacha was. They forgot. So what happened? Shachu v'lo yadu in Pesach dochas HaShabbos imlav. They mamish forgot. Can you imagine this? They mamish forgot, is Pesach docha Shabbos or not? Amru, they said, Klum yesh adam shiodeh in Pesach dochas HaShabbos. Is there anyone here who could tell us the halacha if Pesach is docha Shabbos, if Pesach sets aside Shabbos or not? Amru lahem, they were told, Adam echad yesh sha'ala mi Bavel. There is an individual who came from Bavel. The Hillel Habavli Shmo. And his name was Hillel Habavli, Hillel the Babylonian. I also remember again, we know the story of Hillel, we've spoken about it before. Hillel did not come from a rabbinic family. Right? Hillel came from a family of merchants, successful merchants. And Hillel decided that Hillel came from Bavel. He wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael to learn Torah. So pretty much his father said, if you leave, you're out of the family business and you have no money. I'm not giving you anything. So he asked his brother, will you help me out? Brother said, if you leave, you're out. You're done. Hillel comes to Eretz Yisrael a pauper. I will say that's the story. That's why, remember again, he couldn't afford the coin to get into the base measure of Shemayin of Talion. That's why again he learned by the skylight, and he almost froze to death by the skylight. He was penniless. So he was known as Hillel Habavli, Hillel the Babylonian. So he said there's this guy Hillel Habavli, Sheshimish Shnei Gedali Hadar. He learned by the two Gedali Hadar, Shmaya Vav Talion. V'yodea. In Pesach dochas HaShabbos imlav. So they told Bnei B'Seira, the sons of B'Seira, these three great Rabbanim, go ask Hillel the Babylonian. He'll answer the question. Karulo. So they called Hillel. Amrulo. They said to him, Klumata Yodeh in Pesach dochas HaShabbos imlav. Hillel, do you know, is Pesach dochas Shabbos? Right? Erev Pesach falls out, can we offer up to Karban Pesach on Shabbos? Amrulahem. V'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu. So Hillel says, what? Do you think there's only one Karban Pesach? Yesh lanu b'shana shedoches HaShabbos? V'alo harbe yosem emasayim pesachim yesh lanu b'shana shedoches HaShabbos. Hillel said, you think there's only one Karban Pesach that is doches Shabbos? There's more than 200 pesachim that are doches Shabbos. Now, Bosai, what Hillel was referring to was like this. Karban Pesach is not the only Karban that's doches Shabbos. In fact, every Shabbos, we offer up 4 karbanos. We offer up 2 tamidin, 2 musafin. Right? That's over 400 karbanos a year that are offered up on Shabbos, not counting what happens on Yom Tiv. So Hillel says, you're looking at this the wrong way. You're wondering, is Karban Pesach docha Shabbos? We have many communal karbanos that are docha Shabbos. Amrulo, minayim lecha. So they said to Hillel, how do you know this? Amrulohem ne'emar mo'ado bePesach, v'ne'emar mo'ado b'tamid. Hillel says it's Gzeira Shava. It says Moado in its appointed time by Pesach. Pesach was offered in its appointed time. And it says Moado by the carbon tamid, the daily communal offering. Ma Moado ha'amr b'tamid doches ha'shabis. Af Moado amr b'pesach doches ha'shabis. Oh, Hillel says it's Gzeira Shava. Moado. Says Moado by tamid. It says Moado by Pesach. Just like by tamid, everyone agrees that you offer up the carbon tamid on Shabbos. So too by Pesach, you will offer up the Pesach even on Shabbos. Va'od kavachomerhu. Furthermore, Hillel says, and if you don't like the Gzeira Shava, it's also a kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Umat tamid she'in anush karis dochas Shabbos. So if tamid, also remember again, failure to bring the tamid does not result in karis. Yet, ultimately, the tamid is dochas Shabbos. Pesach she'anush karis eino din shedoches Shabbos. The Rabbi said the Korban Pesach, which does carry with it a penalty of kares for failure of non-performance, certainly should be dochas Shabbos. The Rabbi says Hillel advanced two arguments. Number one, the Gzeira Shava of Moado from Pesach to Tamid, just like Tamid is dochas Shabbos, Pesach is dochas Shabbos, and number 12, Kavachomer. If carbon Tamid, which does not carry a penalty of kares, ultimately again can be offered up on Shabbos, then certainly Pesach, whose failure to perform does result in kares, is docha Shabbos. So I'll say what happened? Miyad hoshivuhu barosh uminuhu nasi alehem. We'll say in that moment, Bnei Beseira abdicated their position of the Nesius and gave it over to Hillel. So we'll say, I just want to point out, the story is amazing. The story is amazing on two levels. First of all, the meteoric rise of Hillel, literally again coming penniless, and also remember only really beginning his real formal education when he came to Eretz Yisrael, learned under Shlein of Talion, which was also quite amazing. So a later start, coming from nothing and becoming the Nasi, and I will say the incredible humility of Bnei Beseira. Like this is also an incredible story in humility. How Bnei Beseira realizing that Hillel was a greater Talmid Chacham than they were, yielding the position of power, yielding the position of the Nesios, and giving it to Hillel. So what happened? V'hayadorish kol yom kulo behilchos Pesach. So Hillel then started, first day on the job, he starts giving a shir, Hilchos Pesach. But I will say, watch this. Hischil mikanteran b'dvarim. But then he began to give Bnei Beseira Musar. And he said to them, Amar lahem, mi garam lachem she'ela mi bava v'yeh nasi aleichem. How is it? How did it become that I, who came from Bavel, became the Nasi over you, the Talmidei Chacham of Eretz Yisrael? And remember again, this is also very startling, because remember, at this point in time, Eretz Yisrael was still the center of Torah. So the notion that a Babylonian Jew had become ultimately again the Nasi. I will say, it's like, can you imagine that you have an American rabbi who becomes the chief rabbi of Israel? It's not correct. I think the fan is on. Is that what you're going to look at? Yeah, I think the fan is on. So Hillel says, do you want to know what happened? That I came from Bavel and became the Nasi over all the Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael? So the Gemara says, Atz lo shahai sabachem shaloshimashtem shnei gedoli hador shmai vav talyon. Because you Rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael, you're lazy. You did not properly serve Shmai Naftal. Let's remember again, Shmai Naftal were the Gedolei Hadar. So Hillel said, you did not go ahead and properly learn by. You remember, we'll say, Shimush Talmidei Chacham. This is incredibly important. So what Hillel was giving them Musar, when it comes to having a Rebbe, there are two parts to having a Rebbe. Number one is learning his Torah. When it says, I have a Rebbe, I need to have someone from whom I learn his Torah. Rabbi said, then there's also the concept of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, which just means spending time by your Rebbe. And when you spend time by your Rebbe, you learn things, not just what he says over in his shir, but ultimately, again, conduct, approach, again, for let's say the Gedolah methodology of Psak. So Hillel's not saying they didn't learn by Shema Natan. They may have learned. But if you look at his Lashon, he says, Shaloshimashtem Shnei Gedolei Hador Shmai Vav Talyon. You may have come to the Shi'ur of Shmai Vav Talyon, but you are not mishamesh tamidicham. You didn't spend time with the Gedolei Hador. You didn't stay by them. You didn't learn. You learned their Torah, but you didn't learn from them. The fact that I learned from them, not just the Torah, but spent time with them, served them, that's what contributed to my rise over you. Amrulo. So fine, so good. So he gives the shir, he gives musar, it's a good day. So Amrulo, they said to Hillel, Rebbe, shachach v'lo hevi sakim erev Shabbos mahu. So we'll say, now watch this. So now Hillel gets his first shaila as the nasi, right? So the first shaila he got, was the catalyst for his rise. Now he's the nasi, he gets his first shaila. Rebbe, what happens if somebody forgot to bring the knife for shchita on erev Shabbos? Right? Let's say, so again, now, same case. It's Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos. So in an ideal world, you will have brought your knife to the Beis HaMikdash prior to Shabbos. Right? Bring your knife there, right? What happens if somebody forgot to bring their knife before Shabbos? What can you do on Shabbos? Hillel says, Amar Lahen, first wide line of Osei Samech Vav Mud Aleph, Amar Lahen, Halacha zu shamati v'shachachti. Hillel said, I know I learned this, but I can't remember the halacha. Rabbi say, but watch this. Ella hanach li Yisrael. But I have a good idea. Rabbi say, this is startling. I have a good idea. Leave the Jewish people alone. Which that just literally means leave them. Im ein neviim heim b'nei neviim heim. If they themselves are not prophets, they are the children of prophets. So Rabbi say, so Hillel was saying, look, let's see what the people themselves do tomorrow. This was obviously a situation where Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos. So let's see exactly how the people conduct themselves. Rabbi say, watch this. Lamachar, Misha Pischo Tala Tochvo B'Tzamro, Misha Pischo Gidi Tochvo Ben Karnov. So Rabbi say, what happened? The next day, Hillel saw something very interesting. If somebody was bringing a sheep for Karban Pesach, they tucked the knife into the wall. And if somebody was bringing a goat, because a goat doesn't have thick wool like a sheep, they put the knife in between the horns of the goat. Hillel saw this. Ra'a Maisa Beniskar Halacha. Hillel saw this and he remembered, that's the halacha. Va'amar kach mikublani mi pishmaya v'naftalion. This is in fact what Shmaya Naftalion taught me as well. That if you forgot to bring your knife before Shabbos to the Beis HaMikdash, you could tuck the knife in the wool of the sheep, or you could tuck the knife in between the horns of the goat. So we'll say, an incredible story. Now let's analyze it a little bit. Amar Mar, Ne'amar mo'ado b'Pesach v'ne'amar mo'ado b'Tamid, ma mo'ado ha'amar b'Tamid doches ha'Shabbos, af mo'ado ha'amar b'Pesach doches Shabbos. So we'll say, so remember again, Hillel advanced two arguments, or two answers to the question. One was a Gzeir Shava, one was a Kavachomer. The first Gzeir Shava was mo'ado. It says in its appointed time mo'ado by Karban Tamid, and it says mo'ado ultimately by Karban Pesach. Just like Tamid is Doche Shabbos, so too Pesach is Doche Shabbos. The Tamid Gufei Minalan the Doche Shabbos. But by Tamid itself, how do we know? I know you're telling me the word Mo'ado, but how do I know that Mo'ado means that Tamid is Doche Shabbos? If you want to say this is mamish what's being learned out from the word Mo'ado, Pesach Nami Haksiv Be Mo'ado, but by Pesach it also says Mo'ado, Ella Mo'ado Lo Mashmale. Suppose it must be the word mo'ado by itself is not enough to teach me this halacha. So where is it learned from? Ela Amar Kra, Olas Shabbos b'Shabbaso, Al Olas HaTamid. Suppose because it says Olas Shabbos b'Shabbaso, the carbon is offered up Shabbos b'Shabbaso Mechlal, the Tamid Kerva b'Shabbos. Suppose say that's interestingly enough, it's from the phrase Olas Shabbos b'Shabbaso that I learn that a Tamid is offered up on Shabbos. And once I learned that a Tamid is offered up by Shabbos, then the Gzeir Shava of Mo'ado could teach me that just as Tamid is offered up on Shabbos, so too Karban Pesach is offered up on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, V'od Kavachomer, Uma Tamid Shein Anush Karis Doches HaShabbos, Pesach Shanush Karis Ino Doches HaShabbos. So we'll say, but remember Hillel then said there's also a Kavachomer. What's the Kavachomer? If Tamid, which doesn't carry a penalty of Kares, is performed on Shabbos, or the more so Pesach, which does carry a penalty of Kares, is performed on Shabbos as well. But Ikolam Mifrach, there's a Pircha. I could ask a Kasha on the Kavachomer. What's the Kasha? Ma le Tamid Shekin Tadir V'Kalil. We'll say Tamid is different. Why? Number one, it's Tadir. it occurs every day. Number two, it's an Ola fully consumed on the Mizbeach. That's not like Pesach. Pesach is only performed once a year. Maybe a guy will go Pesach Shin maybe twice a year. But Lamaisa, and it's not Kalil, it's not fully burnt on the Mizbeach. Amar Lahu, Bereisha Parchua, Vahadar Amar Lahu Gezerah Shava. So first Hillel said the Kavachomer, and then they brought up the Kasha and the Kavachomer. Then Hillel said the Gezerah Shava. So the Gemara says, V'chimi achar the Gomer Gezerah Shava Kavachomer Lamali. So I will say, but I don't understand, why does Hillel need both a Gezerah Shava and a Kavachomer? If once you know, we'll say all the more so, once you're going to tell me that there's a kasha on the kavachomer. So we'll say, to which the Gemara says, Ela ledido ka'amar lahu, bishlama gzera shava lo gamiraso, de'in adam dan gzera shava me'atzmo, ela kavachomer adam dan me'atzmo, ibariluchu lemeidan. Because we'll say, Hillel said like this. Hillel says, there's a kavachomer and the gzera shava. Gzera shava, you can only darshan if you have a Masorah from your Rebbe. You must have a tradition from your Rebbe regarding the Gezerah Shava. You can't just make up your own Gezerah Shavas. That's different than a Kavachomer. A Kavachomer, Abose, is a logical argument. A person has the ability to espouse their own logical argument. It doesn't mean it's correct just because you espouse it. So Hillel says, listen, B'nai B'seira, maybe you don't agree with my Gezerah Shava of Moado, because maybe you don't have a Masorah, but at least you should agree with my Kavachomer. Right, my Kavachomer. If Tamid, which doesn't have a punishment of Karis, is offered up on Shabbos, then all the more so Pesach, which does have a punishment of Karis, is offered up on Shabbos. And what happened? Amrulei, Kavachomer Pirchu. And they said back to by the way, the Kavachomer is not absolute because it's a Pirchu, there's a Kasha. What's the Kasha on the Tamid? Number one, that the Tamid is Tadir, it occurs frequently. Number two, it's fully consumed in the Mizbeach. That's different than Karban Pesach. Fine. Sefer Rabbi say, Hillel's argument really though is comprised of both Gezerah Shava and the Kavachomer. Gezerah Shava of Moado, between Pesach and Tamid, and Kavachomer between Pesach and Tamid as well. Amar Mar, Lamachar, Misha Pischu Tala Tochev Lo B'Tzamra, Gedi Tochev Lo Bein Karnav. So we'll say, remember again, the next shayla they asked Hillel was, what happens if you forget to bring your knife to the Beis HaMikdash? So what comes out from that story is, if you forget to bring your knife on before Shabbos, you could tuck the knife in the wool of the sheep or between the horns of the goat. Amud Beis. But I will say, isn't there a problem with that? The act of tucking the knife in the wool or putting it between the horns, is that not an act of working a sacrificial animal? In other words, the sacrificial animal now is carrying the knife. Is that not a form of labor? And I will say, you are not permitted to go ahead and work a sacrificial animal. To which the Gemara, it reflects the view of Hillel. What's the view of Hillel? This is incredible. The Sanya Amr Hillel miyamav lo ma'al adam ba'olaso. Let's listen to this. In all the days of Hillel, no one ever committed an act of me'ilah. I must remember again, me'ilah means mundane use of sacrificial items. How did they not commit me'ilah? Let's listen to this. Ella mavia chulun la'azara u'makdisha v'somech yadu alav v'shochta. So let's listen to this. Hillel came up with a fascinating approach. Hillel said, when you bring a karban, do not consecrate that karban, do not consecrate the animal until you arrive in the Beis HaMikdash. We'll say such a great chap. See, we'll say, when does Me'ilah come about? Me'ilah comes about when you go ahead and you consecrate that animal while it's still in your house. That's when now there's a concern that what's going to happen? You're going to end up going ahead and utilizing it for something mundane in the interim. So Hillel had a great chap. What was his chap? Don't consecrate the animal until you arrive in the Beis HaMikdash. This way you avoid any issues of Me'ilah. So the Gemara says, but Pesach b'Shabbos heichi masi makdishlei. But Rabbi say you're permitted to go ahead and consecrate an animal on Shabbos. In other words, when Pesach falls out on Shabbos, are you permitted to go ahead and consecrate an animal? V'tanan, we learned, ein makdishin, ve'in ma'arichin, ve'in machrimin, ve'in magbiyin shuma u'maisrus. Kol elu b'yam tevamru, kal v'chomer b'Shabbos. So I will say, but 1 second, the Mishnah teaches me, without going through the whole list over here, you are not permitted to go ahead and consecrate an animal. And I will say, why can't you consecrate an animal on Shabbos? Because remember, the act of consecrating an animal changes its status. anytime you change the status of something on Shabbos, that has the appearance of doing something transactional in nature. And anytime you do something transactional in nature, the concern is it has the appearance of a business dealing. That's why you can't do these things on Shabbos. You can't go ahead and, pledge the value of something on Shabbos. Or you can't go to make something a chirim on Shabbos. You can't separate out shumas and maestros. These all have the appearance of transactional items. So you're not really permitted to consecrate an animal. So remember, Hillel's chap was, listen, when you're tucking the knife into the wool, you haven't consecrated the animal as a Pesach yet. If you haven't consecrated the animal, wonderful. So therefore, when the animal is carrying the knife embedded in its wool, it's not me'ilah. It's not me'ilah, because the animal's not consecrated. Let the animal bring the knife to the Beis HaMikdash. When the animal arrives to the Beis HaMikdash, that's when you'll consecrate the animal. But can you do that when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos? You can't consecrate an animal on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, you're right. But hanini b'chovos shein kavol lehem zman. Aval chovos shekavol lehem zman makdishin. We'll say, when is this so that you can't consecrate an animal on Shabbos? This is only with obligatory animals that ultimately, again, do not have a set time. But when the obligatory carbon in question has a set time, you are permitted to go ahead and consecrate that on Shabbos as well. Look at Rashi. Chovos hakavol zman lebo bayom shapir dami dahoil v'nishchatin hayom yochol lakdish hayom. So any animal which you have the right to slaughter that day, you also have the right to consecrate that day. Dam Rabbi Yochanan, makdish adam as pescho b'Shabbos v'chagigasa b'Yom Tov. Ultimately, again, a person is permitted to go ahead and consecrate his carbon Pesach on that day. So therefore, it would appear that what Hillel was suggesting was as follows. If you forgot to bring your knife on Shabbos, right, on Shabbos Erev Pesach, what you essentially do is as follows. The practice was, they weren't consecrating the carbon Pesach anyway until when? Until they got to the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore what? Tuck the knife into the wool if it's a sheep, or between its horns if it's a goat. That way again, the animal will transport, you don't have to carry the knife, the animal will transport the knife. It's not called me'ilah, it's not called use or working a sacrificial animal. Why? Because the animal is not consecrated yet. It doesn't mean I'm consecrated until when? Until you arrive in the Beis HaMikdash. By the time you arrive in the Beis HaMikdash, good news is what? The knife is already there. But isn't there a Shabbos problem? Both say, isn't this leading a laden animal? In other words, both say, you can't put a load on your animal on Shabbos. That's the malach of mechamer. So the Gemara says, mechamer kila achar yad. You're right, I'm sorry. Mechamer kila achar yad. Mechamer kila achar yad. Nami nihi deus daraisa leka. So we'll say, so the Gemara answers, well, it's not a normative form of leading a laden animal. In other words, people don't normally transport stuff like this. First of all, we'll say generally, sheep and goats are not beasts of burden. So therefore, people don't normally put stuff on top of their sheep, on top of their goats. And the act of putting the knife in the wool or between the horns is a non-normative act. To which the Gemara says, that's fine that it's non-normative. So non-normative says it's not an Isser D'Oraisa, but it should still be an Isser D'Rabbanan. To which the Gemara says, Mia'ika, Hainu D'Kabay Minei, Davar Sheyesh Lahetem in HaTorah, Udavar Shavus, Omeid Lefanav, La'akro Ki La'achya B'Makom Mitzvah Mai. So we'll say, this was the very Shaila they were asking Hillel. We'll say, this was the Shaila. This was the Shaila. Let's assume for a moment that it's not an issue of working a sacrificial animal because we're not sanctifying, we're actually not consecrating the animal until it gets to the Beis HaMikdash. The Shaila was a Hilchos Shabbos question. Are you permitted to transport an item through an animal on Shabbos for the purpose of a mitzvah when it involves transgressing an Isser D'Rabbanan or not? That was the Shaila. Putting the knife in the wool of the sheep or between the horns of the goat will be an Isser D'Rabbanan on Shabbos. Are you permitted to transgress an Isser D'Rabbanan for the sake of the mitzvah of Karban Pesach? That was the Shaila. To which Hillel said, Amar lahen, halacha zu shamati v'shachachti, elahanichu len liyisrael im nevin he b'nevin. To which Hillel said, I know I learned this. I can't remember the halacha, but let's see what the Jewish people do tomorrow. Shabbos say, it's an incredible story. But now there's a secondary follow-up from the story. So the Gemara says, Amar lahem, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, When a person becomes arrogant, im chacham hu, chachmasa mistalekes mimenu. If he's a Talmud Chacham, so his wisdom leaves him. Im navi hu, nevuasa mistalekes mimenu. If he's a prophet, or if she's a prophet, as we'll see, their prophecy leaves them. So both say, so this is an incredible idea. The destructive nature of gaiva. So if a person becomes a bal gaiva, a person becomes arrogant, they can be incredibly wise, but they lose their wisdom. They can be prophetic in nature, but they lose their prophecy. Even if a person is wise, they lose their wisdom. Where do we learn this from? Hillel. Both say from Hillel. Where do we see the Amar Mar? Hischilu mekanteram bidvarim. Because remember, both say after Hillel was appointed Nasi, he begins to give Musar to Bnei Beseira. And apparently, again, the Gemara feels the Musar that he gave was given over in a little bit of an arrogant way. Vika Amar Lahu, halacha zu shamati v'shachachti. And you're both say, so remember, the confluence of events is quite dramatic. Because what happens, right? Bnei Beseira don't know the halacha about Erev Pesach on Shabbos. Hillel knows the halacha. And then what happens right afterwards? They ask him a shaila, right? They ask about the knife on Shabbos. And what happens? Hillel says, I don't know. So how does that happen? Hillel says, I don't know. Because Hillel acted with a little bit of gaiva. Hillel acted with arrogance. And when you act with arrogance, you forget your wisdom. Im navihu nivu aso. From where do we know that even if you're a prophet, if you act with arrogance, you forget your prophecy? Interesting enough, from Devorah. From Devorah the Neviah, what happened? Chsiv chidlu parazon b'Yisrael. Chidlu ashekamti Devorah, shakamti b'Yisrael. So literally, Devorah was saying, the Jewish people stopped living in the open cities until Devorah came along. So Devorah took full credit for the safety and security of the Jewish people, without recognizing that yes, she was a major player in it, but it was also because of Barak and others that Jewish safety was acquired. So she took all the credit. Ksiv, Uri Devorah, Uri Direshir. Then it says, awaken Devorah, which means that she lost her prophetic power. She had to say, reawaken the power of prophecy. So once again, you see, Devorah acted in an arrogant fashion, therefore she lost her prophecy. So I will say, when you act in an arrogant fashion, ultimately, again, if you're wise, you could lose your wisdom, and even if you're a prophet, you could lose your power of prophecy. Reish Lakish Amar, Kol Adam Shekoe, similarly again, if a person gets angry, Im Chacham Hu Chachmasa Mistalekes. Even if a person is wise, they lose their wisdom. I will say an incredible. So Gaiva and arrogance are very much two sides of the same coin, right? Because when a person gets angry, often they get angry when things don't go their way. Well, that presupposes that things are supposed to go your way. Who says that things are supposed to go your way, follow your plan? That's a manifestation of arrogance. So therefore, again, that's why the Chazal will often discuss arrogance and anger in the same breath. So called Adam Shekoes, if a person gets angry, Im Chachamu Chachmasam Mistalekes. If he's wise, even if he's very wise, his wisdom leaves him. Im Navihu Nivu Asam Mistalekes. Even if he's a prophet, his prophecy leaves him. Im Chachamu Chachmasam Mistalekes Mimenu. If he's wise, his wisdom leaves him. Where do we know this? Moshe. We learned this out from Moshe Rabbeinu. Dechsiv Vayiktzov Moshe al Pekudei Achayo. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu got upset at the soldiers. We both say this is by the war with Midian. Right? Remember again, this is after the story of Pinchas. So Klal Yisrael goes to war against Midian. The obligation was to go ahead and wipe out all of the Midianim. But they had spared some of the lives of the Midianite women. Moshe Rabbeinu got very upset. He got very angry. And what happens? Uksiv, Vayomer Elazar HaKohen El Anshi Hatzava Habanim L'Mochama, Zos Chukas HaTorah Asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. Now remember, this section is where we learn the halachos of Hechsher Kelim. Because remember, what they had taken from Midian were utensils. And ultimately, the Torah teaches us about the fact that if you acquire utensils from a Gentile, you must kasher those utensils because of their non-kosher absorptions. The Gemara points out it's interesting to note that it was Elazar, the Kohen, who taught Klal Yisrael these halachos. Why was it Elazar and not Moshe? Mechlal de Moshe alemine. Because it will say because Moshe got angry, these halachos were hidden from him. So we'll say, so you see from here that when you get angry, even if you normally possess an incredible amount of wisdom, that wisdom evaporates. Im navihu mistalekes mimenu me'elisha. All right, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem with the Nevuah piece, Emirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkach, I will say.